What are you doing here?
Collecting my mail. I own this home.
Got any identification?
Yeah, it's inside. I live here.
The cold steel cuffs pressed into his skin as three uniformed officers forced him down onto the hood of their squad car. His house keys had fallen to the pavement beside envelopes scattered everywhere, each one displaying his name alongside this very address. The numbers mounted on the mailbox were identical to those on his front entrance. Beyond him, inside his residence, sat his morning coffee still heating on the countertop. His computer remained open on the table where he'd been working just moments earlier. His house slippers covered his feet. Still, here he found himself, cheek against heated metal, as people from nearby homes paused to observe, simply because he'd stepped out to collect his mail on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Before moving forward, where are you joining us from? For those visiting the first time, please click that subscribe button. Narratives like this one deserve attention, and subscribing helps broadcast them to additional viewers who must understand what's actually occurring. His identity was Trevor Hobbs, age 38. His profession was accounting for a medium-sized downtown firm, though he primarily worked remotely from his residence. The property was an unpretentious ranch-style dwelling with 3 bedrooms and blue-painted shutters he'd applied himself 2 summers prior. His residency there spanned 7 years, 7 years worth of monthly payments, 7 years maintaining the yard, 7 years greeting people from the neighborhood and accepting deliveries, 7 years being integrated into this Riverside Drive community. That particular Wednesday began no differently than usual. Trevor rose at 6:30, prepared breakfast, and accessed his work system by 8. His morning involved examining financial documents and assembling tax materials for various clients. Approximately 2 in the afternoon, he paused to move around. Through the window, he observed the mail carrier had already passed. Without much consideration, he put on his indoor footwear and headed outside. The mailbox positioned itself curbside roughly 30 feet from his entrance. Trevor opened it, removing the accumulated contents, primarily bills, a periodical subscription, various promotional materials. While sorting through these envelopes, already heading back inside, he detected a vehicle approaching rapidly from behind. 2 squad cars halted abruptly in the roadway, obstructing his drive. 4 officers exited swiftly, their actions deliberate and focused. Trevor glanced up, bewildered. One officer's hand positioned near his waist, adjacent to his firearm. Trevor's chest tightened immediately. He recognized this sensation. Every black individual in America recognizes this sensation. Officer Reeves initiated contact, his tone demanding and authoritative. He questioned Trevor's activities. Trevor raised the mail, keeping his opposite hand open and visible. He calmly stated he was retrieving his mail from his personal mailbox. This residence belonged to him. Officer Dixon positioned himself on Trevor's right flank, establishing separation from his colleague. This represented tactical positioning, complicating Trevor's ability to monitor both officers simultaneously. Dixon inquired about identification. Trevor confirmed he possessed it, located inside his residence in his wallet on the kitchen surface. Reeves requested the address. Trevor indicated it matched the address appearing on each piece of mail he held. Reeves asked his residency duration. Trevor answered 7 years. Reeves demanded proof. Trevor felt tension building but maintained composure. His identification inside would verify everything. The mail in his grasp verified it. What additional evidence did they require? That's when Reeves instructed him to position his hands visibly. Trevor still clutched the mail in his left hand. He elevated both hands, the envelopes plainly displayed. Dixon radioed requesting additional units, reporting a suspected mail theft individual at Riverside Drive. Mail theft individual. Trevor experienced those words like physical impact. He restated this was his residence, his mailbox, his correspondence. Yet the officers weren't genuinely listening. They processed him as a lawbreaker claiming innocence rather than a homeowner who happened to be black. A woman emerged from the residence directly opposite. Mrs. Caldwell had reached 73 years and had inhabited the neighborhood longer than anyone else on this street. She'd delivered Trevor baked goods upon his arrival. He cleared her driveway each winter during snowfall. She began hurrying across the pavement as quickly as possible, announcing that Trevor resided there, that he was her neighbor, that this represented a horrible error. Dixon moved to block her, raising his hand. He informed her this constituted official police operations and she must retreat. Mrs. Caldwell objected. She'd known Trevor for years. He was decent. He'd lived right there in that residence. Dixon's tone intensified. He warned her that interference could result in obstruction charges. Mrs. Caldwell halted her approach but refused to return inside. She remained on the walkway, her expression showing disbelief and fury. 2 additional squad cars appeared. Trevor counted 6 officers presently. 6 armed officers for 1 individual holding mail at his personal mailbox. His heart pounded intensely. He concentrated on maintaining steady breathing, keeping his hands observable, keeping his actions slow and careful. He'd watched the coverage. He understood how these encounters could conclude. Sergeant Foster advanced, obviously the senior officer present. He requested Reeves provide a briefing. Reeves stated they'd received a 911 report approximately 20 minutes earlier, describing a questionable individual examining mailboxes throughout this area. They had observed Trevor at this mailbox and initiated investigation. Trevor interjected, his voice tense yet controlled. He wasn't examining mailboxes. He was examining his personal mailbox at his personal residence where he'd resided 7 years. Sergeant Foster observed him, then the dwelling, then Trevor again. He questioned whether Trevor possessed a verification of residency. The inquiry lingered. Verification that he inhabited his personal dwelling. Trevor gestured toward the mail in his elevated hands. Every item bore his name and this location. Foster glanced at the envelopes but didn't attempt taking them. He asked whether Trevor possessed identification inside. Trevor verified he did. Foster reached a determination. He instructed Dixon to restrain Trevor while they confirmed his details. Trevor's eyes expanded. He questioned why restraint was necessary. He'd committed no violation. He stood in his personal driveway holding his personal correspondence. Foster responded that this represented standard protocol until they could authenticate his identity and residency. Standard protocol. Trevor had been reduced to standard protocol at his personal residence. Dixon extracted restraints. He ordered Trevor to turn and position his hands behind him. Trevor's thoughts raced. He desired to argue, desired to refuse, desired to demand they acknowledge him with fundamental dignity, yet he also desired to survive this interaction. He understood that cooperation didn't ensure protection, but resistance almost guaranteed intensification. Trevor turned. The mail dropped from his grasp, spreading across the driveway. He positioned his hands behind himself, the restraints secured around his wrists, frigid metal against his skin. He'd never experienced restraints previously, never been detained, never received even a traffic violation, and presently he stood bound at his personal mailbox. If you've experienced profiling based on race, right profiled in the responses. Mrs. Caldwell had extracted her phone, holding it upward with trembling hands. She was capturing everything. Additional neighbors had appeared from their residences. Mr. Fitzgerald from the adjacent property stood on his porch, appearing shocked. The young household from the corner observed from their yard. Everyone could observe Trevor in restraints in his personal driveway. Reeves approached Trevor's entrance. He tested the handle, secured. He questioned whether Trevor permitted them entering to obtain his identification. Trevor agreed, but noted his keys remained in his right pocket. Dixon reached into Trevor's pocket, retrieving the key collection. He tossed it toward Reeves. Reeves unlocked Trevor's entrance and walked into his residence, into his private dwelling without a warrant, with coerced permission granted while Trevor stood restrained. Reeves vanished inside while Trevor remained there, bound and degraded, observing a stranger navigate through his home. Several minutes elapsed. Trevor could only speculate what Reeves was doing inside, examining his possessions, evaluating his space, processing his home like an investigation scene. Eventually, Reeves emerged carrying Trevor's wallet. He opened it, removing the driver's license. Reeves transferred the license to Foster. Foster inspected it thoroughly. The photograph matched Trevor's appearance. The name matched what Trevor had stated. The address matched the residence they stood before. Foster radioed the license number to dispatch, processing it through their database. The response returned moments afterward. No warrants, no criminal history, clean driving history, everything verified precisely as Trevor had been stating from the beginning. Yet they didn't remove the restraints immediately. Foster posed additional questions. Where did Trevor work? How long had he worked there? Where was his vehicle? Trevor answered each inquiry, struggling to suppress frustration from his voice. He worked at Caldwell and Associates downtown. He'd been there 9 years. His vehicle was in the garage. Foster dispatched an officer around to the garage. The officer peered through the glass and verified a vehicle sat inside. He transmitted the license plate number via radio. Foster had dispatch process that also. The vehicle registered to Trevor Hobbs at this location. Every single element validated Trevor's account. The account he'd been providing since the initial moment the officers appeared. The account that should have been apparent from the start. Only then did Foster signal to Dixon. Dixon unlocked the restraints and removed them from Trevor's wrists. Trevor brought his hands forward, massaging where the metal had pressed into his skin. Red impressions encircled both wrists. His hands shook as the adrenaline that had been sustaining him began dissipating. Foster returned Trevor's wallet and keys. He stated they'd received a report about questionable activity in the vicinity. They were responding to that report. Simply performing their duties. Trevor stared at him incredulously. Simply performing their duties. No expression of regret for restraining him at his personal residence. No recognition of how inappropriate this was. Foster stated Trevor was free to depart, free to enter his personal dwelling, the dwelling he'd never actually departed except to check his correspondence. The officers began returning to their squad cars. Routine. Just another response. Just another shift. Mrs. Caldwell rushed over once the officers withdrew. She was nearly crying, asking whether Trevor was acceptable. Trevor nodded but didn't trust himself to vocalize yet. His throat felt constricted. Mrs. Caldwell informed him she'd captured everything on her device, every single moment. If he required it, she possessed it. The squad cars departed one after another. The small gathering of neighbors began dispersing, returning to their residences. Some appeared compassionate. Others appeared uneasy, as though they had observed something they wished they hadn't. The street resumed its typical quietness. Trevor bent down, collecting the dispersed mail from his driveway. His hands continued shaking slightly. A utility bill, an insurance advertisement, a credit card solicitation. Completely ordinary correspondence. His correspondence. He returned to his residence, climbed the steps to his entrance, and went inside. He placed the mail on the kitchen surface beside his coffee mug. The coffee had cooled. His computer screen had darkened. He observed the clock. The complete incident had consumed less than 30 minutes. Less than 30 minutes to be processed like a lawbreaker in his personal driveway. Less than 30 minutes to have his rights compromised and his dignity eliminated. Trevor sat at his dining table. His work still awaited him. Documents and tax materials requiring his focus, yet he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept replaying the interaction. 6 officers, restraints, having to verify he inhabited his personal residence, the casual manner they'd processed him like a suspect rather than a citizen. He extracted his phone and began researching. He needed to understand his alternatives, his rights, what recourse he possessed. He discovered similar narratives immediately. A black individual detained while relocating into his personal apartment. A black woman restrained while supervising white children in her supervision. A black youth detained for sitting in his personal vehicle. The instances continued endlessly, an infinite scroll of individuals criminalized for existing while black. Do you believe this occurs more frequently than media coverage? Write yes or no below. Trevor contacted a civil rights lawyer the following day. He brought Mrs. Caldwell's recording, his documentation of the incident, and the photographs he'd captured of the impressions on his wrists. The lawyer listened to his narrative, watched the recording twice, and clarified his alternatives thoroughly. He could submit a complaint with the police department's internal review division. The lawyer cautioned him that most complaints resulted in the officers being exonerated, yet it established an official record. He could pursue a civil rights legal action, though that would be costly, lengthy, and emotionally taxing. He could approach the media and publicize his narrative. Trevor selected all 3 options. He submitted the formal complaint. He authorized the lawyer to begin preparing legal action And he contacted a local news outlet that had been covering narratives about racial profiling. The news segment broadcast the subsequent week. It displayed portions of Mrs. Caldwell's recording, included an interview with Trevor, and featured a declaration from the police department. The department's declaration defended the officers entirely. They'd responded suitably to a 911 report. They'd followed appropriate protocol. They'd released Trevor once his identity was authenticated. Everything was procedurally correct. That was the issue, though. The procedures permitted this to occur. The protocols allowed officers to restrain an individual at his personal mailbox based exclusively on an ambiguous 911 report. The policies protected the officers who'd compromised Trevor's rights. The system was functioning precisely as structured, and the structure was the problem. The narrative circulated through the community rapidly. Individuals shared it digitally, debated it in response sections, discussed it at family meals. Some expressed indignation on Trevor's behalf. Others defended the police, maintaining they were simply being cautious, simply responding to a report, simply doing what they must do. The 911 caller eventually came forward voluntarily through the news outlet. He was an individual who inhabited several blocks distant and had been driving through the neighborhood that afternoon. He'd observed Trevor at the mailbox and something caused him unease, so he contacted police. When questioned what specifically appeared questionable, the caller struggled to articulate it. Trevor simply appeared like he didn't belong there. Didn't belong in his personal neighborhood, at his personal mailbox, at his personal residence. When the journalist pressed about whether race influenced the decision, the caller insisted it didn't. He would have contacted regardless of race, he maintained, yet statistics and research demonstrated otherwise. Studies showed that white individuals were considerably more likely to perceive black individuals as questionable even when participating in identical activities. The same action considered normal in a white individual became threatening in a black individual. The internal review investigation consumed 4 months. The determination was precisely what Trevor's lawyer had anticipated. The officers functioned within department policy. The stop was validated based on the 911 report. The restraint was validated pending confirmation of identity. The restraints were validated for officer protection. Every action validated by policies that enabled racial profiling to persist unchallenged. The civil legal action advanced slowly through the judicial system. Depositions were arranged and rearranged. Documents were demanded and examined. Motions were submitted and contested. The city's lawyers contested every stage, defending their officers and their protocols. They weren't going to make this simple. Trevor continued inhabiting his residence on Riverside Drive. He still worked from his residence. He still checked his correspondence. Yet it was altered presently. Every time he walked to the mailbox, he felt intensely conscious of his environment. Who was observing? Who might contact the police? What normal activity might be construed as questionable because of his skin tone? His connection with his neighborhood had fundamentally transformed. Some neighbors demonstrated tremendous solidarity, visiting to express their disgust at what occurred. Others avoided him, uncomfortable with the focus and dispute his situation had introduced to their peaceful street. A few appeared to view him differently, as though being detained by police suggested he must have done something to merit it. Trevor contemplated relocating, beginning again elsewhere where he could simply be a new neighbor instead of the individual who got detained at his mailbox. Yet anger sustained him there. Why should he have to depart? He'd done nothing inappropriate. Relocating felt like permitting racism to prevail, like acknowledging he didn't belong in a space he'd financed and maintained and designated home for 7 years. Almost a year following the incident, the city agreed to resolve the legal action. They would compensate Trevor an undisclosed amount without acknowledging any misconduct. That was standard in resolutions. Money exchanged, yet no fault acknowledged. No expression of regret offered. No recognition that rights were compromised. Just cash to conclude the matter and proceed. The resolution also mandated the police department to examine its policies on questionable person reports and implement additional training on implicit prejudice. Trevor had minimal confidence that training would alter anything meaningful. The same commitments had been made in other municipalities following other incidents. Still, the incidents kept occurring with disturbing frequency. The money didn't make Trevor whole. It didn't eliminate the memory of standing in restraints while neighbors observed. It didn't restore his sense of protection in his personal residence. It didn't prevent the subsequent individual from being profiled. It was simply money. What remained with Trevor most wasn't the fear he'd experienced, though that was considerable. It was the casual character of the complete interaction. The officers hadn't hesitated. They hadn't questioned. They'd received an ambiguous description and immediately processed him as a lawbreaker. The system had supported them at every tier. The dispatcher who deployed them, the sergeant who ordered him restrained, the investigators who exonerated them. Everyone performed their function in compromising his rights, and everyone was protected by the policies that made it all legitimate. This is what systemic racism appears like in application. Not necessarily hateful individuals, but systems and structures that generate racially discriminatory results. A black individual checking his correspondence becomes a questionable individual. A racially prejudiced 911 report becomes a validated police response. Restraining someone at their personal residence becomes appropriate protocol. The system functions as structured, and the structure is the problem. Trevor's experience isn't uncommon. It's not an unusual malfunction of an otherwise equitable system. It's a Wednesday afternoon. It's checking the correspondence. It's living while black in America. Countless individuals experience similar incidents, constantly. Some conclude with restraints and release like Trevor. Some conclude with detentions on fabricated accusations. Some conclude with violence. Some conclude with funerals. The common element is the automatic assumption of criminality, the presumption that black individuals are out of position, the burden of verifying your right to exist in your personal spaces. The question isn't what Trevor should have done differently. He handled it perfectly. He remained calm, cooperated with instructions, clarified clearly, provided identification. The question is why he had to do any of that. Why an individual checking his personal correspondence had to verify he belonged in his personal residence. Why his statement wasn't adequate. Why 6 officers appeared for envelopes. Until we address those questions honestly and confront the prejudices and systems that enable these incidents to repeat endlessly, nothing transforms. The policies remain identical. The training stays insufficient. The officers keep responding identically. And more individuals like Trevor find themselves restrained for the offense of being black in public spaces. Trevor still inhabits Riverside Drive. He still checks his correspondence, though it will never feel simple again. He still maintains his yard and pays his mortgage. He refuses to be expelled from his residence. Yet something fractured that Wednesday afternoon. The illusion of protection shattered. The belief that his property offered defense from profiling proved incorrect. He comprehends presently in a manner that goes bone deep that his skin tone marks him as questionable to some individuals regardless of his actions, his location, or his accomplishments. That knowledge is exhausting and infuriating and the daily reality for millions of black individuals navigating a society that views them as threats first and citizens second. So, next time you observe a narrative about someone being detained or restrained for something ordinary, something you've done countless times without consideration, understand it's not exaggerated. It's not performing victimhood. It's a system that processes individuals differently based on race, that criminalizes black existence, that demands constant verification of belonging. Trevor's mailbox still stands at the conclusion of his driveway. The correspondence still arrives every day. Yet the simple act of checking it carries weight presently that it never should have. That loss of ease and protection and normality can't be restored by any resolution or policy modification. If this narrative opened your eyes to something you hadn't fully comprehended before, consider sharing it. These experiences need to reach individuals who haven't lived this reality. That's how awareness develops. That's how change initiates. Thank you for watching until the conclusion.